Okay, so let's get down to the fundamentals. What is photogrammetry? Photogrammetry is basically making 3D models from images, from pictures that you take with a camera. Here's an example. I have 215 pictures of this tree trunk, and you might ask, why are you taking pictures of a tree trunk? Well, I use these images to make this 3D model, and then I get hyper-realistic, or we'll say photorealistic textures from this that I bake out, and I can get things called like normal maps, which we'll talk about later if you don't know what those are. But I get the color, and I get a displacement map, which actually can make a plane, circular surface actually bump out. I get ambient occlusion maps, which basically show where the light would be blocked out from the geometry that sticks out. And let me just show you this if I can pull it up here. So you can see all the images are down here that I've taken. Okay, and they look pretty flat if you look at them. The original image doesn't look this flat. I actually do some post-processing to try to make as little shadows as possible on these so that we get a nice color texture off of it. And as you could see, if you're looking here in the lower left corner, I have 243 million faces on this, and that is incredibly high. Now, I do have a pretty powerful computer. I'll go over the specs really quick just so you know. It's an 18-core i9 Extreme. I have a RTX 4080, and I have 128 gigs of RAM. Those are the major things that let me be able to make photogrammetry at this level. You could probably do, something like this with less specs, but it might take a lot longer. So I can process something like this maybe in a couple hours, whereas if I had less powerful specs, it might take all day or all night or something like that. However, you do need to have enough RAM to be able to basically load all this stuff into the memory. And then the graphics card actually is what processes a lot of it. By the way, we're in a program called AggieSoft Metashape. That's the program that I will be using to show the processing of the images into a 3D model. There's many other programs out there that do this. This just happens to be the one that I use. Okay, so let's show you what it looks like if we put the images out. So if we back off here, this is all 215 images. And basically I walked around this tree. I didn't really have any measuring tools other than I just basically would take a little step and shoot a picture, take a little step, shoot a picture, and I would look at my screen and I would basically make sure that, I was somewhat aligned with the tree and sort of it was taking the same amount of space up on the screen the whole time. I didn't actually have the camera up to my eyes because I would have to hold the camera way down, like at my waist level for some of these, and then bring it up a little bit, and then bring it up, and then bring it up a little bit more until I was actually holding the camera over my head. So I just walked around this and just took a whole slew of pictures, and then brought it home and post-processed them, and that was it. I put them into here, and I let it do its process, and it turned out really, really good. So basically, as you get different objects, you can use different techniques. A tree, something that's like long and cylindrical, very, very easy to do photogrammetry on, or at least the trunk part of it, because it's not shiny, which can be challenging. You can do it, but you need to have special tools. It has lots of detail. You need detail on the surface. If you don't have detail on the surface, usually the photogrammetry has some issues, but we'll talk about how you can get around those issues. But it's pretty simple just to kind of go up and down and around. So that's one example. All right, so here's another example. This was, I did this actually quite a long time ago when I was sort of still learning a lot about photogrammetry, and it's not perfect. It has a few little issues. If I was to do it again today, I'd be able to do it a lot better. Here's the actual model, and so when I was doing this, I had to get really close. I think I used a macro lens, if I'm not mistaken, to get a lot of this. And doing macro photogrammetry can be a little bit tricky, but it is completely possible if you use the right techniques. But you could see there's just an incredible amount of detail in this. And let's see here. Go back to the model solid. Strange. Getting some weird artifact here. I must have I have the wrong matte cap on here. Let's go ahead and see if we can find a better matte cap. Okay, so I put a different matte cap material on here so you can see this a little bit better, but you can see you can get an incredible amount of detail. There's a few errors on here. Like I said, this is something I was doing when I was fairly new at doing macro photogrammetry, so was still learning stuff, but pretty interesting nonetheless. So as I got a little bit more practice, I was getting better results, like so. And this is a Spinosaurus. As you can see, let's see what it looks like shaded. And the shaded in Metashape basically means it's being colored per vertex. So every single one of these roughly 6 million face, or let's say 3 million vertices, are giving color based on the images, and then it's baked onto those vertices, and you get the color from it. But you also can have model texture, which actually takes the picture and bakes the color right onto a texture, and that's going to be the way to get the most accurate, detailed look out of your subjects. So yeah, you could see that this obviously was a little bit more advanced at this point. Did some trial and error and just got better and better at it, and so was getting better results. Let's look at what the pictures actually look like here, the picture array. Now this is interesting because I wanted to get both sides, and so what I did, if you look at the pictures down here, is I laid the dinosaur on its side and took all the different pictures while it was laying on its side, and then I went ahead and flipped it, and I flipped it to the other side, and then I took pictures on the other side, and there's ways you can go ahead and merge the two different sides together so that they match up. So that's what I ended up doing for this one. And so if you go ahead and look at the array of pictures, it kind of looks like a half dome on either side, and they're sort of matched up. So that's a technique that's maybe a little bit more advanced. When we first start out, we'll just do stuff where we're not necessarily flipping it. We'll just do a scan and get, basically 95% of the object, but maybe like the bottom we won't necessarily get. In this case, though, if you look in here, you can actually see how much detail you can get. Like even the little engravings on the bottom come out. Here's Spinosaurus, and if you look closely, you can see the engravings down there, which will definitely come out. So you can see that that is really, really cool. So here's another example of photogrammetry, and this is a lighthouse that's probably about 25 feet tall, and it's at the Lighthouse Lodge Bed and Breakfast on Lake Schaefer in Indiana, Monticello, Indiana, and it's actually my parents' bed and breakfast. And I did this with a drone, so a decent drone with a decent camera, just flying it around, and you can see you can get pretty decent photogrammetry from it. I haven't actually baked the color texture into it yet. This is just the vertex colors. If I bake the color texture into it, it would be a lot more detailed than this particular model looks right now. We look at the solid look, though, you can see there's enough detail for sure to get a decent model out of this and decent textures out of this. But you definitely want to get a good color texture from the pictures baked into it. Okay, so here's a wood vase that has been in my family for years and years and years. It's hand carved. I think my parents got it when they were on a trip out of the country, And you can see that I only actually did 4 passes here. I probably needed one more right here. And if I had that, I wouldn't get these little holes inside of the base right here. But you might look at this and say, hey, the spacing on that looks completely perfect. And you'd be right. I was actually using a mechanical turntable that links up to the camera, and then it triggers the camera to fire, and then it turns a certain increment and then triggers it again. So we'll be looking at that later. But when you do stuff with a mechanical turntable like that, an automatic turntable, you can get really, really amazing results. Let me show you what it would look like if we go ahead and just look at the solid. You can see how nice and detailed this looks. I also was using what's called cross polarization. And cross polarization is where you cancel highlights on a surface of an object so that you can get just the detail and not any of the highlights, because highlights on the surface can actually cause problems when you're doing photogrammetry. So of course we'll discuss cross polarization later in the more advanced parts, but in the earlier parts we'll just pick objects that don't have to be cross polarized. So this is the smallest object that I've ever successfully done photogrammetry with, and this is a peppercorn. If you look at the pictures down here, you can see that, let's make them bigger. Actually, I think that's as big as they get. We'll just blow it up right here. You can see that this is a pin, so you can imagine how small this object actually is. And I did this with this little TG6, an Olympus TG6, and it has a microscope mode on it, and it will actually do focus stacking within the camera as well. So what focus stacking does is it takes a bunch of different pictures at different focal, within a different depth of field of the focus plane, and it will stack those together so you get a sharper image. So let me go back to the model here. You can see that we didn't actually get a successful thing right down here. You can kind of see a little bit of the silver, but the rest of it is good, and if we needed to, we could just patch that up and basically make it look like the rest of it. But this is another example of some kind of photogrammetry you can do. So this is the last example that I want to show, and it's just some gravel. It's a very simple thing to do photogrammetry on because it's just flat, and basically you can go ahead and just walk around some gravel and take pictures of it. I do suggest don't walk over the areas that you're taking pictures of because you don't want anything to move. You want everything to stay in the same place. But this is super, super easy. It has lots of detail. There's no shininess to the gravel or anything like that. So it works out really, really well. We can look at the detail of it. Just turn it on shaded, and you can actually see the model's detail. This has 26 million triangles, or faces, I should say. And, you know, you could even get it higher than that if you wanted to put more time into it. But why would you do something like this? Well, maybe you need gravel for a landscaping project or something like that, and this is the gravel that you want. You could actually get a scan of it and make textures from this so that you can, you know, make a visualization look exactly the way the client wants you to make it look.